My name is Alara, and I am 28 years old. By trade, I am a landscape architect, someone who spends her days coaxing beauty and order from tangled earth. I design spaces for roots to deepen, for life to flourish in sun and shade. It's a quiet, hopeful profession, and one I chose because it is the very opposite of the soil in which I was raised. Our family home, a sprawling craftsman overlooking a steely stretch of the Puget Sound, was a masterpiece of curated perfection. From the street, it was all warm cedar, polished river stone, and windows that glittered like knowing eyes. My mother, Beatrice, a former art historian with an encyclopedic knowledge of beauty and its many subtle failures, was the architect of our lives. Her standards were not merely high, they were a distant, shimmering horizon you could spend a lifetime walking toward and never reach. My sister, Serafina, 2 years my junior, was born walking that horizon. She was my mother's magnum opus, the living embodiment of grace. Her childhood was a gallery of triumphs, the lead in every ballet, the blue ribbon on every art project, a circle of friends as flawless and well-bred as she was. When Sarah erred, which was rare, the mistake was framed as a charming quirk, a moment of artistic spontaneity. Serafina has such a vibrant spirit, Beatrice would murmur, her gaze soft with adoration. In the next breath, her eyes would find me. Alara, why are you holding your fork like that? It's so utilitarian. We are not laborers. My brother, Leo, for years younger than me, learned early that the easiest path through our carefully landscaped home was in our mother's shadow. He became her loyal foot soldier, his laughter a ready echo for her critiques, his own jibes sharpened to curry her favor. If I brought home a 98 on a calculus exam and Sarah a glowing teacher's note about her creative writing, Leo would be the first to comment. Almost perfect, Alara. The story of your life, isn't it? My father, Arthur, was a quiet ghost in the architecture of our family. A maritime lawyer, his work was a convenient and constant excuse for his absence. When he was home, he was barricaded behind the pages of a book or the locked door of his study. The few times I tried to speak to him about my mother's relentless criticism, his response was always a sigh, a weary rubbing of his temples. Your mother is a complex woman, Alara. She just wants you to be your best self. Can't you try to see it from her perspective? He moved out when I was 15, the divorce a quiet, tidy affair that changed very little about the emotional climate of the house. The narrative of my inadequacy was authored early. At 8, I won the regional science fair with a detailed project on native plant ecosystems. I raced home, my ribbon a vibrant splash of purple against my chest, only to find Beatrice and a small audience of her friends admiring a single, perfect watercolor of a seashell painted by Serafina. When I held up my award, my mother's gaze flickered over it. How industrious, dear, she said, her voice carrying a faint note of pity. But true talent, you see, is about aesthetics, not just effort. My academic achievements were consistently reframed as evidence of my plodding, unimaginative nature. When I was accepted into a prestigious landscape architecture program, my mother's only comment was, well, it's a practical skill. I suppose someone has to design the gardens for the people who own the beautiful homes. When Serafina, after a brief and unenthusiastic stint at a liberal arts college, announced she was dropping out to become a lifestyle influencer, Beatrice hosted a champagne brunch in her honor. She's following her passion, she declared to her friends. She has the courage to create her own path. The story of my birth was revealed not in a moment of tender confidence, but during a dispassionate conversation with an insurance agent when I was 16. Beatrice, on the phone, sighed dramatically. Yes, the policy for Alara. She was a surprise. A rather difficult one. I had just been offered a curatorship at the museum. The timing was simply terrible. It set my career back years. She spoke as if I were a piece of furniture in the room, inanimate and unfeeling. From then on, any perceived failure on my part was met with a pointed reminder. I gave up a world of beauty for this family, she would say, her eyes fixed on me. I only hope it was worth the sacrifice. I tried, for years, to be worthy of the sacrifice. I kept my room a study in minimalist perfection. I practiced my sketching until my fingers ached. I learned the Latin names of every plant in her prize-winning garden. It was never enough. My sketches lacked soul. My tidiness was clinical. My knowledge was bookish, not intuitive. The day I turned 18, I moved into a tiny dorm room and breathed air that felt my own for the first time. Serafina and Leo received new cars and generous monthly stipends. I received a list of available work-study jobs. You need to learn the value of $1, Alara, my mother explained. It builds character. Your siblings are more sensitive. They need to be protected from such harsh realities. While they took ski trips to Whistler, I worked holiday shifts at the campus nursery. When they graduated debt-free, I graduated with honors, a portfolio of award-winning designs, and a student loan that felt like a mountain. But I also graduated with a job offer from a respected Seattle firm, one I had earned entirely on my own. When I signed the lease on my first apartment, a small, light-filled studio in a neighborhood with more character than prestige, I made the mistake of calling my mother, a fool's hope flickering in my chest. Fremont, she'd said, the name dripping with disdain. How bohemian. I do hope you have adequate security. Serafina's new condominium in Belltown has a 24-hour concierge and a saltwater pool. Serafina's condo is subsidized by you and Dad, I reminded her, my voice quieter than I'd intended. We invest in assets with a high potential for appreciation, she replied, the words as cool and smooth as river stones. That was the last time I offered her a piece of my life, a piece of my joy. I learned to stop waiting for the sun to shine on me in a garden where I was planted, perpetually in the shade. The wedding invitation was a thing of beauty, thick cream cardstock with letterpressed calligraphy. Serafina was marrying Julian Croft, heir to a local tech fortune. Tucked inside was a handwritten note from my sister, the graceful loops of her script asking me to be her maid of honor. A fragile, tender part of me felt a bloom of hope. Perhaps this celebration of family and future could be a new beginning. The hope withered during the first outing to find bridesmaid dresses. Beatrice insisted on joining, of course, to lend her editorial eye. As I stepped out of the dressing room in a simple, elegant sheath of deep forest green, a color that brought out the gold in my hazel eyes, my mother circled me like a vulture. No, that won't do at all, she declared, her voice loud enough for the other patrons to hear. The cut is too severe for your frame, Alara. It highlights your shoulders. You've always had a rather athletic build, haven't you? Sarah, looking uncomfortable, suggested another style. But Beatrice was warming to her theme. Serafina has that delicate, long-limbed grace, like a Degas sculpture. It's a matter of bone structure, really. Some people are simply born with it. 2 weeks later, Sarah called. We're going with a pale blush pink, she said, her voice apologetic, but firm. Mom thinks it's softer, more romantic. I had already purchased the green dress, a non-refundable custom order. When I mentioned this, Sarah sighed. Alara, why are you always so hasty? You make things so complicated. This is supposed to be my special day. The months leading to the wedding were a gauntlet of such moments. My firm won a prestigious regional award for a public park I had designed. When I mentioned it at a family dinner devoted to tasting wedding cakes, my mother waved a dismissive hand. That's nice, dear. Now, Serafina, do you think the passion fruit filling is too assertive? The rehearsal dinner was at a glass-walled restaurant perched on a pier, the Seattle skyline a glittering tapestry behind us. My father was there with his new wife, Helen, a kind, quiet librarian who always seemed to shrink in Beatrice's presence. Arthur, you look exhausted, was my mother's greeting to him. I hope Helen is remembering to feed you properly. At dinner, I was seated next to a man I vaguely recognized. Alara? It's Mark, he said. We dated for a few months in college? I remembered. He had broken up with me by text message. My brother, Leo, appeared, clapping Mark on the shoulder. Figured you two could catch up, he said with a wink. Mom thought you'd be lonely without a date. It was a deliberate, calculated cruelty, a spotlight on my solitude in a room celebrating partnership. Later, I overheard my mother talking to our aunt. Serafina is just pure light. She draws people to her. Alara is more self-contained. Always has been. So independent. She insists on doing everything the hard way. My best friend, Chloe, who I'd met in my first year of university and who understood the topography of my family better than I did, sent me a stream of supportive texts. You are a force of nature. Don't let them dim your light, the last one read. I'm on standby for an extraction mission if you need it. That night, on the balcony of my hotel room, I watched the ferries glide across the dark water like slow-moving stars. A stubborn, foolish part of me still clung to hope. Tomorrow, I would be the perfect maid of honor. I would give my speech, a carefully crafted tribute to the sister I loved despite the wall between us. I would be gracious. I would be poised. I would be the daughter she could not find fault with, just for one day. I would rise. The wedding morning was a watercolor of soft gray skies and shimmering water, the kind of subtle, moody beauty that was my sister's aesthetic. I arrived at the waterfront estate early, ready to help, but was immediately dispatched by my mother on a series of errands. Alara, thank heavens, she said, not looking up from where she was adjusting a flower arrangement. The calligrapher used the wrong ampersand on the place cards for the head table. Please, go sort it out. Serafina is meditating and cannot be disturbed. While the other bridesmaids, a flock of sorority sisters, laughed and sipped mimosas in silk robes, I spent 45 minutes on the phone with a frantic calligrapher. When I returned, the professional photographer was staging candid family moments. The women of the family, he called out. Beatrice pulled a laughing Serafina close. She glanced at me. Oh, Alara, you're back. Squeeze in here, I suppose. As I moved to her side, she subtly turned her shoulder, angling her body so that in the final shot, I was just a sliver of blush pink silk, an afterthought at the edge of the frame. I held onto my promise to myself, my composure a shield. I helped fluff Sarah's 16-foot train. I fetched her water. I found the lost earring belonging to the groom's mother. I was useful, efficient, and invisible. The ceremony was breathtaking. Serafina was luminous as she walked down an aisle carpeted in white rose petals. For a moment, watching her, all the hurt receded, and I just felt a pure, simple love for my little sister. The reception began in a flurry of champagne and congratulations. Then came the toasts. Julian's best man was funny and brief. My father was warm and sentimental. Then Beatrice stood, her poise absolute, the entire room falling silent under her spell. When a daughter is born, she began, her voice rich with emotion, a mother's heart learns a new kind of love. With Serafina, it was a love of pure, uncomplicated joy. She smiled at my sister, her eyes glistening. She has always been our North Star, bright and true, guiding us with her grace and her unerring sense of beauty. She knew what she wanted from life, and she pursued it with a quiet, elegant determination. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, a bracing for the inevitable comparison. Not all children are born with such clarity, Beatrice continued, her gaze sweeping over the guests before settling, just for a second, on me. Some paths are more circuitous, more fraught with difficulty. The air in the room shifted. A few guests exchanged uneasy glances. But our Serafina, Beatrice said, raising her glass, her voice ringing with pride. At least she was a joy from the moment she was conceived. The words fell into the quiet room like stones into a still pond. She wasn't finished. Some children are burdens, you know, she added, a confidential, almost philosophical aside to the hundreds of guests. A drain on a mother's spirit, on her ambitions. But Sarah. Sarah was a gift. The silence that followed was cavernous. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. Then, a single, sharp sound cut through it. Leo's laugh. A short, dismissive bark. "Mom's just being honest. Alara," he said, leaning toward me. "You've always been a bit of a project." In that moment, a lifetime of trying, of hoping, of bending myself into shapes that might be deemed acceptable, crumbled into dust. I saw it all with a terrible, crystalline clarity. The horizon my mother had set for me was a mirage. I could walk forever and never arrive. There was no pleasing her. There was no winning. My very existence was my original, unforgivable sin. I carefully placed my linen napkin on the table. I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate. I didn't look at my mother's triumphant face, or my sister's shocked one, or my father's pained and useless expression. I simply turned and walked. I walked through the grand ballroom, past the towering cake and the string quartet, and straight out into the cool, damp night air. I handed my valet ticket to a startled attendant. For the first time, I wasn't running from their judgment. I was walking toward the quiet, unknown landscape of myself. The first 20 miles were a blur of tears and rain-slicked highway. The world outside my windshield dissolved into streaks of red and white light. I finally pulled into the parking lot of a small, nondescript motel, the kind with a flickering neon sign that promised nothing more than a clean bed and anonymity. In the room, I slid out of the blush-pink dress, a color I now despised, and let it fall to the floor like a shed skin. My phone, which I'd silenced, was lit up with a constellation of notifications. The first was from Chloe. "Extraction mission deployed. Where are you?" "I'm on my way." A wave of gratitude, so intense it felt like grief, washed over me. The others were a predictable storm. 3 texts from Leo. "Nice job making Sarah's wedding all about you. Mom is hysterical. Hope you're happy. You're officially a monster." A single, curt text from Serafina. "I can't believe you did this to me. We will talk when I get back from my honeymoon." 2 missed calls from my father, no message. And 1 voicemail from my mother. I played it on speaker, the phone lying on the cheap bedspread. Her voice was ice. "Alara Beatrice Vance. Your public display of petulance was the most profoundly selfish and embarrassing act I have ever witnessed. You will call me back immediately. You will come up with a plausible story, a migraine, a sudden illness, and you will apologize to Julian's parents. The damage you have done to this family's reputation tonight is incalculable." I deleted the message. Then, with a steadiness that surprised me, I blocked her number. Then Leo's. Then Serafina's. The sense of relief was so immediate and so profound it was physical. It was like taking off a heavy, waterlogged coat I'd been wearing my entire life. I called Chloe, and the whole story tumbled out in a torrent of sobs. She listened, her silence a comforting presence across the line. "You know this is the best thing you could have ever done for yourself, right?" she said when I finally fell quiet. "Walking away isn't a failure, Alara. It's a fucking triumph." After we hung up, I opened my laptop. On impulse, I navigated to a design industry job board and found a posting I'd bookmarked weeks ago but had been too intimidated to pursue. It was for a senior designer position at a boutique firm in Denver that specialized in sustainable urban parks. "You're not experienced enough," a voice that sounded suspiciously like my mother's had whispered in my head. "You'll only embarrass yourself." Now, that voice was gone, replaced by a quiet hum of possibility. I polished my cover letter and hit send. Then I wrote a brief, professional email to my boss, explaining that a family emergency required me to take my accrued vacation time, effective immediately. Around 3 a.m., my phone rang. An unfamiliar Seattle number. I answered, my voice raspy. "Alara." It was my father. "Are you all right?" "I just need to know you're safe." "I'm safe," I said. "Good. That's good." He paused, and I could hear the static of his indecision. "Listen, what your mother said. It was unforgivable. I should have said something." Yes, I said, the single word holding the weight of 28 years of his silence. You should have. He was quiet for a long time. You're right, he said, his voice thick. I have failed you, Alara. I'm so very sorry. The apology was a leaky lifeboat sent out long after the ship had gone down, but it was something. I have to go, Dad. I know. Just take care of yourself. I am, I said, and for the first time, I knew it was true. I'm finally starting. The next morning, while my family was likely navigating the strained pleasantries of a post-wedding brunch, I drove to their house. I used my old key, the silence of the large, perfect home pressing in on me. I moved quickly, packing a few boxes with the essentials, my books, my design portfolio, the old quilt my grandmother had made me, clothes. I left my key and a short note on the polished granite of the kitchen island. I will contact you about the rest of my things. As I was loading the last box into my car, my father's sedan pulled into the driveway. He got out, his face etched with sleeplessness. I had a feeling you might come, he said. I'm not here to fight, I said, closing the trunk. I know. He looked at the boxes. Alara, I want to help. If you need money for a new place, a deposit. I looked at him, at this man who had chosen peace over his own child, and I felt a vast, weary sadness. I need space, Dad. I need to find out who I am in a place where I'm not constantly being measured and found wanting. He nodded, his eyes glistening. When you're ready, he said, his voice breaking. If you're ever ready, my door is always open. I got in my car and drove away, not looking back. I didn't know it then, but a storm was breaking in the world I'd left behind. While I was scheduling a video interview with the Denver firm from my motel room, my Uncle Ben, my father's brother and a man of quiet integrity, was calling my mother. My cousin Maya told me about it later. Beatrice, he had said, forgoing any pleasantries. Clara and I were appalled by your behavior last night. To humiliate your own daughter at her sister's wedding? We've watched you chip away at that girl's spirit for years, but that was a new level of cruelty. My mother, Maya said, had been flabbergasted into silence. No one ever challenged Beatrice. The entire family is talking, he'd continued, his voice firm. Not about the flowers or the dress, but about what you said. Clara and I won't be coming for Christmas this year. Not until you make a sincere effort to repair the damage you've done with Alara. Unaware of this familial earthquake, I sat in front of my laptop and spoke with a woman named Sarah, a founding partner at the Denver firm. I talked about my passion for creating public spaces that felt like sanctuaries, about the importance of native species and water conservation. The fear that usually accompanied such interviews was absent, replaced by a calm sense of purpose. That afternoon, I received a formal offer. The salary was more than I'd hoped for, and they included a generous relocation package. I accepted without a moment's hesitation. I spent the next 2 weeks in a strange limbo, living out of a suitcase in Chloe's spare room, arranging for movers, and fielding a slow trickle of messages from a family in disarray. My Aunt Clara sent a text, thinking of you. We are on your side. Even one of Sarah's bridesmaids reached out. I'm so sorry about everything. The way your mom treated you all weekend was not okay. The validation was like rain on parched ground, but I knew, with a certainty that was new and bracing, that my healing couldn't depend on it. I was building my own foundation now on new ground. As I drove east, watching the familiar green of the Pacific Northwest recede in my rearview mirror, I felt a sense of quiet exhilaration. I was driving toward the mountains, toward a horizon that was real, solid, and entirely my own. A year can be a lifetime. In the 12 months after I drove away from Seattle, I built a new world for myself, one beam and brick at a time. My apartment in Denver was small, but it had a wide balcony that faced the Rockies, and every morning, I watched the sun spill over the peaks, a daily, silent promise of a fresh start. My work at High Plains Collaborative was more than a job, it was a calling. My boss, Marcus, was a quiet, brilliant man who valued my ideas. Alara, Your concept for the Riverside Park is revolutionary, he'd said after my first major presentation. It's exactly the kind of thoughtful, community-focused design we need. The praise, delivered so simply and sincerely, felt foreign and wonderful. I learned to accept it without apology, without deflecting. I found a therapist, a wise woman named Dr. Sharma, who helped me map the emotional landscape of my past. In her calm, quiet office, I learned to identify my mother's voice in my own head, the relentless inner critic that whispered I was not enough. You have spent your life trying to bloom in a toxic environment, Alara, she told me one afternoon. Now you have repotted yourself. Give yourself time and nourishment. You will be surprised at how you grow. And I did. I made friends. Sarah from work and her circle. People who knew me only as I was, a capable designer, a kind friend, someone who loved hiking and bad puns. I was building a chosen family, a support system based not on obligation, but on genuine affection and respect. News from my old life trickled in through my father, with whom I maintained a careful, low-contact relationship. The family, he said, was fractured. My Uncle Ben and Aunt Clara had held to their word, and other relatives had followed suit, creating a schism. Thomas, my brother, had been laid off from his finance job. Apparently, his performance had declined sharply as he became consumed with defending our mother and managing the social fallout. He had moved back home. Serafina's perfect marriage was showing cracks. According to my father, Julian and his family had been mortified by Beatrice's speech. The pressure to maintain a flawless facade was apparently taking its toll on my sister. Then, one crisp autumn evening, nearly a year after the wedding, I received an email from a name I hadn't seen in my inbox before, Serafina Croft. Alara, it began, the tone hesitant. I know it has been a long time. A lot has happened. I have been thinking about what happened at the wedding and about everything before. James said something to me a few months ago. He said my mother talks to me the way a queen talks to her heir, and she talks to you the way a queen talks to a rival. I've been in therapy. I'm starting to see things I was blind to before. I was wondering if you would be willing to talk? I want to understand. I will come to you. No pressure at all. Just hope. I read the email 5 times. I discussed it with Dr. Sharma. A week later, I replied, I'm open to talking. Let me know when you're thinking of coming. She arrived 2 weeks later, looking smaller and more fragile than I remembered. We sat on my balcony, the mountains a silent witness. She told me about her marriage, about the constant pressure from our mother to be perfect, to reflect glory back on her. The night of the wedding, she said, her voice trembling after you left, James asked me why I didn't defend you. And I didn't have an answer. Because the truth is, I was embarrassed. Not by you, but by Mom. And I was scared. All my life, I've been terrified of being on the receiving end of her disapproval. So I let her aim it all at you. Tears streamed down her face. I am so sorry, Alara. I was a coward. I was a terrible sister. In that moment, watching her, I didn't feel anger. I felt a deep, aching pity for the girl who had been forced to be a princess in a gilded cage. I know, I said softly. Before she left, she hugged me, a real hug, not the air kissing we'd been taught. You were the brave one, she whispered. You got out. A few days after Sarah's visit, my mother called. I answered, my heart steady. I hear Serafina visited you, she began, her voice tight. I hope you didn't upset her further by dredging up all that unpleasantness. She is very fragile right now. The old script. But I had a new role now. What I talk about with my sister is between us, Mom. Is there a reason you're calling? The question threw her. Well, I was calling to say that perhaps it is time to let bygones be bygones. This division is tiresome. I am willing to forgive your behavior at the wedding. I almost laughed. Forgive my behavior? You publicly humiliated me. You told a room full of people that my existence was a burden on your life. There is nothing to move on from until you can acknowledge the truth of what you did and the pain it caused. You have always been so dramatic, she began, but I cut her off, my voice calm and clear. No, I'm being honest. And until you are ready to be honest, too, we have nothing more to say to each other. I ended the call, my hand not even shaking. I had not been angry or tearful. I had simply been free. As the first snow began to fall in Denver, I hosted Thanksgiving in my apartment. Chloe flew in. Sarah and her husband came. Marcus, my boss, and his family joined us. As I looked around my table at the laughing faces, at this beautiful, mismatched family I had built for myself, I felt a sense of peace so profound it was almost holy. The family I was born into may have been a place of carefully pruned shrubs and toxic soil. But here, in the clear mountain air, I had learned to cultivate my own garden. I had learned that you are not defined by the ground you come from, but by the spaces you create, the life you choose to nurture, and the people you invite to watch you bloom.